Chapter 35. The End of a Century. At the end of 1999, people were preparing for the arrival of the new century. For this reason, we traveled to Chile for the long-awaited family reunion, but this time with Emma, so that she could return to her homeland, which she had not visited since she emigrated in 1972. The year's farewell was in a country house near her grandfather's old hacienda in the south, where about 200 people, including neighbors and friends, gathered. Everyone ate, drank champagne, and danced to the sound of the orchestra until the early hours of the morning. The young people revived themselves with turkey soup to continue the revelry. Others fell asleep on the deck chairs around the terraces, and at noon, they dived into the pool to shake off the drowsiness and continue the party, while the waiters came and went with trays of empanadas, anticuchos, and jugs of burgundy. Jim was excited, as he thought of his parents who rescued the countryside and the legacy of his grandfather Joaquin. He remembered with nostalgia those afternoons with his father, hunting and fishing, as well as that legendary Christmas illuminated with the energy of the caterpillars. His siblings, Brian and Susan, were also moved, for this might be the last great holiday together. The end of the century was the end of an era, as they had their lives in different parts of the world. The next day, grandmothers Rosalinda, 92, and Emma, 83, were talking animatedly under the shade of the old jacaranda tree, each one rocking a great-grandchild on her lap. The older ones ran around blowing up the balloons from the night before and scattering the streamers. This was the last time the two matriarchs had the opportunity to share together with a family. We returned with Emma to San Juan, and little by little she lost her memory due to her Alzheimer's, to the point of not even recognizing her beloved Ralph in a photo. She passed away the same day she turned 90, and her ashes were thrown into San Juan Bay next to Ralph's, whose remains waited for her for 25 years to set sail together. Ralph and Emma had 4 children, 8 grandchildren, and 9 great-grandchildren. Chapter 36. The Last Breath of a Dreamer. It was cold and sad, Holy Thursday afternoon, when I arrived at my cousin Gaby's house, where my father had been living since my mother threw him out. After wandering around different boarding houses and old people's homes, we concluded with the family that the best place to put him was there. Sometime later, when my mother turned 90, she was still living alone in her apartment in Santiago. Once again, my cousin offered to receive her and take care of her in her home in Rancagua, since we were not in Chile. Hence, my interest in returning to be with my mother in her last years. This time, I happened to be in the country visiting Deborah's house when Gaby called us to let us know that Tom had a heart attack. We immediately went to see him, but Balthazar also arrived, stood on the edge of the bed, and I told him, "Look who's here, the child." "Hello, Captain," said my brother. At the sound of his son's voice, Tom's eyes widened as he gave him a wink. After spending a few minutes with him, Balthazar went out and left with Jim to buy a lamp, not guessing the momentous event that was approaching. My sister and I kept vigil, and from one moment to the next, we noticed that my father got worse. Seeing him so badly, Deborah left the room to call the ambulance and admit him to the hospital. I asked her to leave him alone at home. However, she in desperation insisted on taking him to the hospital to be revived. While my sister made arrangements with the ambulance, I was left alone with him. I quietly approached him and observed him with closed eyelids, appeared to be asleep, but with some difficulty breathing. I sensed that these were his last minutes, and I wanted to imagine him dreaming or perhaps remembering when he was young, handsome, a champion in sports, a conqueror, charming his doctor, when he visited her for a toothache more than 50 years ago, and she cured him for weeks to see him again and again. I bent down to kiss his forehead, and apparently he reacted to the smell of my perfume, the same Chanel No. 5 he had given me on my 15th birthday. The day he handed it to me, saying, "You will like it. This one is worn by Marilyn, a beautiful blonde, as pretty as you." Images of that occasion immediately came to my mind. I smelled the aroma of the nougat-covered chocolate cake he baked, especially for my birthday. That vivid image contrasted with the reality. I saw him so old and dejected, I felt pity. Life had been a breath, just like Gardel's tango when I heard him sing when I was a child. That little girl who was ashamed of her father when she found him drunk and disheveled, sitting on a bench in the square after school. Now, with half a century of life behind me, I could better understand his particular universe. I too had lived intensely, with highs and lows, sorrows and joys, abundance and scarcity, love and heartbreak, success and failure. These experiences were molding my discipline and persevering character. I now felt confident and proud of my accomplishments, knowing that part of it came from his genes, which gave me a unique stamp. When I saw him open his eyes, I took his hands and he welcomed them. "Maggie, did you arrive?" he said. "Yes, I came to see you." He tried to smile and very softly whispered, "I have been waiting for you. Don't forget what I entrusted you with." "Write your memoirs and crazy things?" I asked. And then I quickly answered, "Don't worry, I will. I think I remember them all. Otherwise, put your own imagination or make the stories up. You're good at it." His voice was getting weaker and weaker, and in a last effort he added, "I'm tired. I think St. Vincent de Paul is coming to pick me up." With tears in my eyes, I told him, "Rest, and when you meet my grandmother, give her a kiss for me." At that moment, the nurses came in with a stretcher to take him away. I, accepting that it was his time to go, insisted that he stay in peace with us. But Deborah, clinging to the idea of keeping him alive, preferred to send him to the hospital. Upon arrival, my father was lowered down and taken to the emergency room. The doctors resuscitated him with oxygen until he was stabilized. Even though it was a public hospital, we asked for the best care. "There is nothing else to do. It's Good Friday Eve and we don't have much staff," said the doctor. "Rest assured that you will have 24-hour care here. Come first thing in the morning if you wish." In addition, we got a nurse to stay with him overnight. Since there was no private room, they took him to a shared room. The image of my father's bed next to that of a dying man handcuffed to the railing stayed with me. With Deborah, we said goodbye to him. I kissed his forehead and promised to return in the morning. We went to bed at almost midnight. At about 4 a.m, the phone rang and a voice announced my father's death. We told Baltasar, took Tom's clothes, and left. We all arrived at the same time and went inside together. After walking down long, dreary corridors to the morgue, Deborah and I sat down and waited for my husband and brother to dress Tom. A few hours later, the funeral service arrived to take him to the wake. While all this was going on, I pondered how finally my father died alone, in his self-fulfilling prophecy. I remember the times when as a child I would ask him, "How are you?" And he used to tell me, "Here, alone, always alone." And so he left. I don't know if it will be fair or not, if one reaps what one sows, but I was very sad that this dreamer, my childhood hero, my encouragement and inspiration, left this world without anyone to take him by the hand to make his journey more bearable. No one should go alone. Glory Sunday dawned resplendent. I guess in heaven for that date they are celebrating and the angels are singing. I think that when they received him, Tom found a party to suit him. I had contacted Bernardo, who lived in Puerto Rico, to tell him the news of our father's passing, but for reasons known only to him, he did not travel to the funeral. Rosalinda Lindo Baltasar, while Deborah and I walked down the main aisle of the cathedral. Very close to the altar, in a fine mahogany coffin, lined in soft satin and crowned with white roses, just like the great lords, Tom began his last pilgrimage. The priest began the Mass and the responsories. Then the Ave Maria was heard. I was comforted to see the church filled with family and acquaintances. I could also make out some of his old friends who were barely standing, the same ones who had accompanied him for years in his wanderings, going around bars until the wee hours of the morning, to finish off God knows where. Already in the cemetery, 2 of them approached to deposit a flower. I approached them to greet them and thank them for their assistance and their gesture. Finally, while everybody was leaving, I stayed a minute to say goodbye in silence. Until the next life, where I hope to be your mother to take care of you, to protect you, and to make you feel not so lonely. When we returned from the cemetery, we went to Deborah's house, where many of her cousins joined us. Instead of a funeral, it seemed like a celebration. We served soup, coffee, rolls, and the inevitable glasses of wine in honor of my father. As the day went by, we all remembered his anecdotes, the funniest being in 1964, when President Charles de Gaulle visited Chile and also Rancagua to pay homage to Generalissimo Bernardo O'Higgins. The Plaza de los Héroes received this ceremony together with the intendant, the regimental commander, and the other authorities. Our national anthem, played by the regimental band and chanted by the entire audience, gave way to the French anthem, of which no syllable could be heard. It was at that moment that Tom appeared, made room between the commander and the President of France, intoning in a loud and firm voice the Marseillaise and leaving everyone perplexed. At the end of his presentation, he squared himself martially like a veteran, and General de Gaulle responded by shaking his right hand. Deborah and I, terrified, ran home to tell our mother the news, hoping that no one had associated us with the improvised singer. As evening fell, in every corner of the city, people were admiring the Chilean citizen's performance and his excellent presentation. Thus we ended the day, between emotions and nostalgia, just as he would have liked his farewell. He did not want us to cry or be sad, but to remember his incredible life. Years ago, when we both talked under the orange trees, he would tell me, "When I die, dress in red and have a party." I fulfilled the promise in almost everything. As evening fell, people began to leave. My mother, Deborah, and I, tired, went to our rooms. I remained meditating, connected with his image, and said, "I have complied with most of what you ask, except for the red dress. I found that it would not look as elegant for the occasion. However, over the black suit, I wore a red silk scarf in your honor. Now rest in peace and wait for me until I arrive. Together there we will plan our next journey." It was a difficult year of great change for me. Tom had left an irreplaceable void. I would no longer hear him on the other end of the phone line when I would sometimes call him to surprise him, sensing his joy when hearing from me. I knew that listening to me made him happy. Just a few words were a balm of affection to his lonely and tedious life. Besides, I would no longer receive his nice letters telling me about his hardships or fantasies. Chapter 38. Farewell, Puerto Rico. Finally, the long-awaited day had arrived. I got up earlier than usual, went to the Social Security office, and told the assistant, "I have come to request my retirement." She proposed that I work an additional 5 years and my pension would increase, to which I responded, "No, not a day more. I think 40 years is enough." "Okay, raise your right hand and say it's true to everything I ask you," ordered the officer. I obeyed and followed his instructions, signing some forms. In doing so, she assured me that my check would be in my bank account every second Tuesday of the month for life. I bid the girl a fond farewell and headed off, almost floating on clouds to tell Jim the news. He took it nonchalantly. After all, his priority had been to save for his old age, especially after the cardiologist had opened his chest and repaired his heart at the age of 50, warning him that if he lived a moderate life, he would live 10 more years, which he obviously ignored. One by one, I met the deadlines I had met myself. At the same time that I liquidated the store, I sold the apartment with such luck that it was done before the famous real estate bubble in 2008, when banks failed, multinational closed, and thousands of people were left jobless and homeless, living at the expense of government subsidies. I was once again blessed. Taking advantage of an opportunity when Jim was traveling in Chicago visiting some of his suppliers, I loaded a container with furniture and household goods, shipping it to our residence in Chile. In addition, I rented a small apartment in the county area and set it up for my husband to be comfortable until he decided to follow me. I must say that it was not easy to execute so much change in such short time, as I had mixed feelings between leaving Jim, who was not at all interested in living in Chile, or starting a new life away from him. Finally, my mother's care made my decision. I temporarily moved in with Bernardo, who had previously bought a small leisure plotland, as they say here, near mine, to enjoy when he came to Chile. Eventually, his second home became his first home. At the end of the main work on my house, when only the finishing touches were missing, I started arriving at 8 in the morning to make sure that the work was done properly. The first day I was very disappointed when I showed up and had to wait almost 2 hours for the crew. When they arrived, they still spent some time looking at their cell phones and laughing at my presence on site. Obviously, they didn't like it and questioned the architect, saying that they would not work under my supervision. The next day, I showed up at the same time, and before passing the entrance gate, I told them that whoever did not agree with my instructions was free to leave, as I would be there daily to make sure that everything was to my liking. No one said anything, and they entered one by one with their heads down. At first, they did not look at me or speak to me, but little by little, they began to consider me, sometimes even sharing a snack during the day. Eventually, I was part of their team. Every day, I communicated with Jim to tell him about the progress in the house. When internet communication was not yet common in Chile, he bought all kinds of gadgets and instructed me in their basic use to show him, in real time, the progress of the work and give me his opinions. A few days before Christmas, I placed my furniture brought from Puerto Rico, giving my home that warm and cozy air that I always longed for. I installed Rosalinda in a large bedroom with large windows, overlooking the garden that I would fill with roses and hydrangeas, her favorites, for her to gaze at from her bed in the spring. I hired 2 women who were especially devoted to her. At that time, Hazel and Julio, married since 1996 and settled in Puerto Rico, wanted to visit California to meet Matt. They liked the place so much that they decided to move there. Hazel wanted to get back in touch with her brother and facilitate the relationship between their children. On the other hand, they understood that their sons, Maximiliano and Salvador, would enjoy better public academic options there. I know that in the intellectual development of my grandchildren, their mother played a major role, but also their father, who made the prodigious image I once had of him change. Throughout 22 years, Julio has earned my trust and my heart for his values, his human qualities, and his respect for my daughter, and also for being an excellent father to my grandchildren. Finally, he has made a great team with Hazel to face with love all the challenges that have crossed their path. Goodbye, Rosalinda. A few months after we had settled in Chile, Rosalinda would turn 100, and for that occasion we celebrated her well-deserved party again, where we continued to verify her great lucidity. She enjoyed excellent health without taking a single medication, and her mind was clearer than ours, as was her mischievousness and sense of humor. I remember perfectly well that at that party there was a good friend of Bernardo's who knew my parents during their vacation stays in Puerto Rico, the Spaniard José de Marco, who came especially for this occasion and was kind enough to give her a nice nightgown to sleep in. At the end of the celebration, he approached her and asked her if the gift would fit her, and she answered in a whisper, "Tonight come to my room and see yourself." Pepe laughed for a long time to the point of tears of his centenarian friend's joke. I should mention that this friend was so kind that years before, on one of Tom's visits to Puerto Rico, having only known him for a couple of meetings, he had been generous enough to invite him to share an exquisite lunch at an elegant Spanish restaurant, giving him the memory of an entertaining afternoon with him, listening to his stories and laughing together, as this old man would never enjoy again. I have no words to thank him for this gesture. As for my mother's humor, certainly not everything was stiffness and seriousness in her. I also remember that on Sundays, when I brought her a small portion of empanada and a glass of juice, she would signal me, saying, "No wine? When have you ever seen an empanada accompanied with juice?" I think she was happy to be in my company and care for her. It was then that I had my deepest conversations with her. We would be alone, and I would ask her to tell me about her life. I told you, we grew up in the Linares hacienda. We had a good upbringing, because my mother was helped by several women from the countryside in the house chores. Ariel and I were the eldest, and we were always looking after our siblings. We were a united and respected family. Rosalinda made a brief silence, as if savoring those teenage memories, and after a sigh, continued with her enthusiastic story. Later, when I finished high school, thanks to the help of a godfather, I entered the University of Concepcion, where I lived my happiest years. But not easy ones, because in those days the classes had a majority of men. Out of a total of 20, there were only 4 or 5 women, who had to be very capable and competitive since the boys would not let us stand out. I remember that on one occasion, we had to present a paper on a prosthesis, and a very intelligent fellow student, David Levis, told me, "Rosalinda, please, lend me your prosthesis. I did not finish mine, and since I am before in the list of the evaluation, there will be no problems." I, as a good person, gave it to him, and with it, he got one of the best grades in the class. The next day, I presented myself to the same committee, with that same paper that I had lent to my colleague and that gave him such high praise. Confident in the quality of my prosthesis, I could not believe the evaluation I was giving. Barely a fair grade. That day I learned about discrimination against women, and I was determined to better myself to overcome all the obstacles that life would put in my way. For this reason, when I received my professional degree with honors, I quickly got a job at the mining camp and then at the National Health Service. In both institutions, the director of the hospital was always a man, as were the heads of the department, who, although often lacking the experience and ability to hold such positions, indeed held them. Of course, my other colleagues and I never had a choice. Nevertheless, I continued to perform my duties rigorously. I never buckled and put up a fight, as you know. I remained upright and confident in my work, and thus gained respect. I hope that over the years this machismo will change and women will be recognized for their own merits. She also remembered Ariel, who was hardworking, smart, and ambitious, becoming his father's right-hand man in the construction business, participating in the government auctions and winning the paving of the downtown area of the province of Linares. Over the years, Ariel saw that the capital was the center of all negotiations and persuaded our father that we should move to Rancagua because it was closer. So we did. And over the years, he became one of the most successful men in this area, developing residential neighborhoods and paving the entire road and sewage network in a large part of the O'Higgins province. He was president of the Chamber of Commerce and was active in charitable associations, she said with great pride in her brother. The same pride I felt for her. Sometimes I would have liked to be like Rosalinda, for the professional accomplishments she had and brought her so much admiration from her community. However, Rosalinda never expressed affection or praised us verbally. She never told us we were cute or that she adored us. Her hardness was that of a stone. Except on that day of her 99th birthday, when we threw her a big party and she surprised us with words already mentioned. One morning, as I approached to say good morning to her, she told me, "There, by the window, he was standing guard for me all night." "Who, Mom?" I asked her. "Him, you know, the gentleman." What gentleman? Tom, your father. And what does he say to you? Nothing. He just looks at me, bites his mustache, and says nothing. I don't know what he's coming for. I listened to her with the assurance that he had been there. I supposed to carry her in her arms to the afterlife, where they should be together, friendly and at peace, waiting for me to remember the old times. Sometimes I think Rosalinda and Tom complemented each other perfectly, even without knowing it. She was the rock where we could feel safe in the stormy sea of life, and he was like the waves that came and went with their swells of dreams, follies, loves and heartbreaks, affections and pains. From both of them, I inherit the strength and enthusiasm to face life. Then she turned 101, then 102, then 103, and my brothers, when they visit her, asked her when she was going to have another birthday party. She would answer Baltasar, "That's not your problem. You better worry about your weight and bringing me my pension, which I haven't seen for months." He would ask, "What did you need money for?" And she would reply, "To go to the hairdresser's, but that is none of your business." Thus she reached the age of 105 without wanting to leave this world. One early morning in July, she fell asleep peacefully, smiling, as people who are comforted after an intense life go to rest. At the funeral, my brother Baltasar bid her farewell by reading a letter that her colleagues signed on the day of her retirement, and that was written by her boss in the National Health Service. Dear friends of this great dental family, few times in my life have I received a more pleasant and important mission than the one I am fulfilling before you, to pay tribute to Rosalinda Torrealba. Why? It doesn't matter. Only that she has completed a lifetime of professional work and is retiring. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not going to speak on this occasion about your studies or your technical capacity or your work. No, that is too prosaic and too well known. It is my wish on this unforgettable night to raise my warm voice of sincere and humble affection, to translate into words all the torrent of feeling and admiration, affection and respect that colleague Rosalinda has been able to awaken in each of one of us. It is possible to demonstrate greatness by multiple means, but our honoree has been, above all things, a woman. In her are amalgamated all the virtues of the Chilean woman, hard-working, long-suffering, kind, and above all, a sublimation to the condition of mother. Herein lies her greatness. Her condition of being the eldest of 8 siblings, which since she was a child, has led her to positions of responsibility toward her loved ones. Afterwards, life has repeatedly demanded the maximum of your energies to get ahead. This is the best reward for your laborious existence, a living example for the new generations that when faced with the first chokes on the road of life, that heaven dreamed of with so much love, crumbles easily. She did not allow it. She continued to fight for her ideals. Magnificent woman, who like a combat leader, you carried your condition as a woman very high, and you fought through all the difficulties that life put in your way, and you conquered. That is what we celebrate today around this table, a group of friends who, although late, value your greatness and remember you with affection. Rancagua, August 27, 1976. The letter was signed by more than 20 colleagues and her boss. With this recognition, Baltasar wanted to summarize the admiration she aroused in all of us.